The day already felt unreal, like the world had been wrapped in thick glass that dulled every sound and slowed every movement. He stood beside his mother's casket, barely aware of the people filing past him, offering soft condolences he couldn't fully hear or process. His chest felt hollow, his thoughts heavy and scattered. This was the woman who had raised him, defended him, believed in him when no one else had. Now she was gone, and all he had left were memories and a numb ache that refused to turn into tears. He had hoped, at the very least, that his wife would be his anchor that day. He hadn't asked for much, just her quiet presence, a steady hand in his, someone to help him stand upright while his world tilted. At first, she had seemed supportive, dressed in black, speaking in hushed tones, accepting condolences from distant relatives. But as the service went on, he noticed she was rarely by his side. Each time he looked for her in the crowd, she was somewhere else, smiling too brightly for the setting, talking animatedly with people he barely knew. Then he saw her standing near the far end of the reception hall, beside his boss. At first, his tired mind tried to interpret it innocently. Maybe she was just being polite. Maybe his boss had come to show respect, and she was thanking him for attending. But the longer he looked, the more the scene twisted into something else. Their conversation didn't look formal or respectful. She was laughing softly, touching his arm as she spoke, tilting her head in a way that was far too familiar. His boss leaned in close, his hand resting casually at the small of her back, his expression relaxed, amused, comfortable in a way that made the husband's stomach drop. The noise in the room faded into a distant hum. All he could hear was the rush of blood in his ears. This wasn't just any day. This wasn't a party, a dinner, or some office gathering. This was his mother's funeral. He was standing there shattered, trying to hold himself together, and the one person who was supposed to share his grief was flirting like she had somewhere better to be. He watched as she brushed an invisible speck off his boss's jacket, her fingers lingering a second too long. His boss smiled down at her, not with sympathy, not with professional courtesy, but with clear interest. And she didn't step back. She didn't look uncomfortable. She looked engaged. A wave of humiliation burned through his grief. Relatives stood nearby, colleagues from work whispered among themselves, and he suddenly wondered who else had noticed this. Was he the only fool who hadn't seen this before? Had this been going on behind his back while he worked late, trusting them both? In that moment, something inside him shifted. The sadness didn't disappear, but it hardened. The pain of losing his mother fused with the sting of betrayal, creating a cold, heavy resolve. He didn't confront them. He didn't cause a scene. He simply looked away, his jaw tight, his eyes dry. He had come to say goodbye to his mother. Instead, he also said goodbye to the life he thought he had. The image of them standing together at the funeral refused to leave his mind. It replayed over and over, sharper each time, like his brain was determined to carve the memory into something permanent. By the next morning, the grief over his mother was still there, heavy and constant, but now it had been joined by something darker, an awareness that the betrayal he felt wasn't limited to his marriage. It had spread into the place where he spent most of his waking hours, his job. At work, his boss had always carried himself with a polished charm that others admired. He was the kind of man who remembered birthdays, complimented presentations, and spoke about team spirit in meetings. He had respected him, even defended him when coworkers complained about his ego. He had believed that professionalism created boundaries, that no matter how friendly things seemed, there were lines decent people didn't cross. Now, those lines looked like a joke. Every interaction he replayed from the past began to feel suspicious. The times his boss had casually asked about his wife, the way he had insisted they all attend the company dinner together, the occasional private jokes the two of them seemed to share that he hadn't quite understood at the time. What once looked harmless now felt like clues he had been too trusting to read. Sitting at his desk, he felt exposed, like everyone else knew something he didn't. His boss walked past, offering the same easy smile, the same confident stride, as if nothing had changed, as if he hadn't stood inches away from his employee's grieving husband and openly flirted with his wife. That calmness felt like its own kind of insult. It said, "I don't fear you, I don't respect you, you're too small to matter." The professional betrayal cut in a different way than the personal one. His wife had vowed loyalty, love, partnership. That was sacred, emotional. But his boss had held power over his career, his income, his stability. There was an unspoken responsibility that came with that position, to lead fairly, to protect employees, not to exploit their personal lives for ego or pleasure. Instead, his boss had blurred the lines for his own amusement. Meetings became unbearable. Every time his boss spoke about trust, teamwork, or company values, it felt like mockery. When he gave feedback on projects, he couldn't help but wonder if it was genuine or just another layer of manipulation. Had his promotions been delayed because his boss wanted to keep him dependent? Had he been kept close just to stay near his wife? The office, once just a place of routine stress, now felt like enemy territory. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher, the conversations more hollow. He realized he wasn't just hurt, he had been made a fool of in two arenas of his life at once. At home, his marriage was built on lies. At work, his loyalty had been rewarded with disrespect.
That double betrayal created a new clarity. This wasn't a single mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a pattern of entitlement from a man who believed his position gave him access to whatever and whoever he wanted. And it was the awakening of a husband who finally understood that he had been underestimating both his enemies and himself. In the days that followed, he surprised even himself with how calm he appeared. On the surface, nothing changed. He went to work on time, completed his tasks, answered emails, and even nodded politely when his boss stopped by his desk. At home, he spoke to his wife in the same measured tone, asked routine questions, and kept his emotions carefully sealed behind a wall she didn't seem to notice. But inside, something had gone quiet in a way that was far more dangerous than shouting or tears. He had always thought of himself as an emotional person, someone who reacted quickly, who wore his heart openly. Now it felt like a switch had flipped. The pain was still there, but it had become focused, almost sharp. Instead of exploding outward, it turned inward and began to think. He started paying attention to details he had once ignored. At work, he listened more than he spoke. He noticed who his boss trusted, which clients brought in the most revenue, where the company cut corners, and which deals were shakier than they appeared in meetings. Years of loyal service had given him access to information most employees didn't have, and for the first time he understood its value beyond doing his job well. He stopped volunteering opinions in group discussions and instead asked quiet, harmless-sounding questions that revealed more than they seemed to. He organized old emails, saved documents, and backed up files he had once treated as routine paperwork. Patterns began to emerge: financial risks, over-promises to clients, internal tensions his boss had smoothed over with charm rather than solutions. At home, he observed just as closely. He noticed how often his wife smiled at her phone, how quickly she turned the screen away, how defensive she became over small, innocent questions. He didn't confront her, not yet. Every suspicious glance, every late message notification, every unexplained errand added another piece to a puzzle he was determined to complete before making a single move. The hardest part was pretending. Sitting across from her at dinner, Hearing her talk about trivial things as if their life were normal required a level of control he didn't know he possessed. Sometimes anger flared so suddenly he had to grip his fork tighter just to keep his expression neutral. But he reminded himself that an outburst would only warn them, and right now, surprise was his greatest weapon. Late at night, when the house was quiet, he allowed himself to think freely, not about shouting or revenge fantasies, but about outcomes, what would actually hurt a man like his boss, what consequences would be lasting, undeniable, and impossible to charm away. Rage wanted chaos, strategy demanded patience. For the first time in his life, he began to separate emotion from action. He let himself feel the betrayal fully, but he refused to let it control the timing of his response. They thought he was broken, distracted by grief, too soft to notice what was happening in front of him. That misunderstanding became his advantage. While they relaxed into their carelessness, believing he was still the trusting husband and loyal employee, he was quietly becoming someone else entirely, someone who understood that the most powerful moves are made in silence, long before anyone realizes a game has even begun. He didn't rush. That was the difference between anger and strategy. Weeks passed, and while his boss continued to run the company with his usual confidence, small, invisible shifts were already underway. The protagonist realized that destruction didn't have to be loud to be permanent. In fact, the quiet kind was far more effective. He began by strengthening his own position. He reconnected with former clients he had personally managed over the years, people who trusted his work more than the company brand. Casual check-ins turned into deeper conversations. He listened to their frustrations, missed deadlines, overpromises from upper management, pricing changes that hadn't been explained properly. He didn't badmouth the company. He simply asked questions that let them voice doubts they were already feeling. His boss, confident and distracted, barely noticed the subtle withdrawal of trust happening around him. A few clients began requesting to work directly with the protagonist instead of going through management. Some delayed renewing contracts, asking for more detailed reports. Investors started asking sharper questions during review meetings. Each issue alone seemed minor. Together, they formed cracks in the polished surface his boss had worked so hard to maintain. Then came the turning point. A major client, one responsible for a significant portion of the company's revenue, requested a private meeting. The protagonist attended alongside his boss, sitting quietly as concerns were raised, missed targets, inconsistent communication, promises that hadn't been delivered. His boss tried to smooth things over with charm, but this time the client had receipts. Carefully saved correspondence, timelines, and figures, many of which matched the records the protagonist had kept. Trust shifted in that room, not dramatically, not with shouting, but with a simple change in tone. The client asked for new leadership on their account, specifically him. From there, the decline accelerated. Word spread among partners that the company was struggling with reliability. A pending expansion deal stalled when due diligence uncovered internal disorganization. Employees, sensing instability, began exploring other opportunities.
The boss, who once walked the halls like a king, now spent his days in tense meetings, trying to patch leaks in a ship that was quietly taking on water. Through it all, the protagonist remained professional, calm, and helpful. He offered solutions, provided clarity, and built relationships based on transparency. When he finally submitted his resignation, it wasn't in anger. It was with another offer already secured, along with several clients who chose to follow him. He didn't have to shout. He didn't have to threaten. By the time his boss realized the full extent of what had happened, his company's reputation was damaged, revenue was shrinking, and the man he had underestimated was gone, taking trust, stability, and the future with him. Power hadn't been taken in a single blow. It had been removed piece by piece until there was nothing left to stand on.